G'day friends, family, fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here in Adelaide, South Australia. Welcome. This is part 2 of my video series on the tyranny of the soft liberal dictatorship that we live under nowadays in our European lands. So in part 1 I was basically outlining how after World War II the native European mindset and worldview was very, very rapidly replaced with a new cosmopolitan liberal worldview that was very, very worldly. Right, the post-war boomer era, they saw themselves as citizens of the world. And my grandparents, who were from an older generation, obviously, they were the war generation, they saw themselves essentially within their worldview and within their own minds. They saw themselves as being loyal citizens of a Western nation, and they saw themselves as being loyal to family and to the people in their local area. Whereas my hippie boomer middle class parents saw themselves as being citizens of the world and basically having a loyalty to all the people in the world. And this set up a very unique conflict within the history of Western man, because as a Generation X guy, I was there to see the hippie boomer conflict between my parents and my grandparents. So my hippie parents always viewed their grandparents as being these small-minded reactionary hicks who couldn't understand a more cosmopolitan, sophisticated world, and they couldn't understand a more cosmopolitan and sophisticated worldview. And essentially my hippie parents were correct, because my grandparents couldn't understand that kind of a worldview. They didn't know why my parents wanted to take all these overseas holidays to exotic nations. My grandparents, they were a little bit liberalized. By today's standards, my grandparents would actually be centrist conservatives, and they but back in the 80s, my grandparents were actually fairly liberal for the war generation, and my grandparents thought, well, we can have some limited immigration of complete foreigners into the West, as long as they have the same mindset as European people. And essentially my grandparents, even though they were an older, more empirical worldview, that they were civic nationalists, to cut a long story short there. So they still had this idea that if people were going to come to the West, they had to have a more loyal and patriotic Western identity. That was the deal with my grandparents. I know that that's faulty within itself. There has to be some race realism in any nation, for the nation to hold together. But Essentially, yeah. Here's an interesting anecdote that illustrates my grandparents' worldview at the time. Was, my grandparents did have some foreign friends. There was a lady that lived down the road. She was Arabic, except she was old fashioned, and basically was loyal to Australia in a more conservative, old-fashioned way. So, my grandparents thought this Arabic woman was fine. They thought she's part of Australian society. We accept her. I remember at one point in the mid 1990s, it was the first time ever walking down the street that my grandparents saw Arabs dressed up in a very traditional fashion. The women basically had burqas on. That, and my grandparents were just horrified to see this within the streets of their own nation, because they considered Australia, quite rightly, to be their nation. My grandparents, they built Australia. They were hardworking people, and they considered that they built this nation with their own hands, which they did. And when they saw completely traditional Arabs who were deeply Islamic and obviously far more loyal to Islam than to Australia, they freaked out in the street. And my granddad was saying, what are these people doing here? Why are we inviting people like this into Australia? Like, it was this huge deal to my grandparents, right? Even though they were civic nationalists, and modern liberalism had corrupted them to some extent, they were still from an older generation that they only wanted to accept people into their nation who were going to be loyal to the nation. Of course, the problem with that civic nationalism is once you get a very large percentage of foreigners in your country, then it's no longer actually your country anymore. So any loyalty becomes incredibly diluted over time. But yeah, that was my grandparents' mindset. Was they reacted with horror to seeing people who were completely alien foreigners on our streets. And this is actually quite this is an instinctively correct mindset to have. For thousands of years, European people living in our European countries, if we saw somebody who was a completely alien foreigner, if we saw a group of people who were completely alien foreigners walking around our streets, we would react with a huge amount of suspicion. We would see that as being a threat to the fabric of our society and culture. And that is the mindset I'm illustrating with my grandparents. They were able, even though they were somewhat corrupted with a liberal mindset, they were able to instinctively see completely alien foreigners as a threat to Western civilization. And this was something my boomer parents, they couldn't manage this. If you saw completely alien foreign people on the street and said, what are these people doing here in our Western lands? My parents, who were boomer hippies, would react by saying, well, you're being racist, you're being intolerant. We have to welcome these people in. Their culture, their way of life is just as valid as ours, and they've got every right. But now that we're all citizens of the world, we're all these cosmopolitan, globo homo kalergi citizens. They've got exactly the same amount of rights to practice and celebrate their own culture and their own ways in our Western lands as we do. Which, of course, this makes no sense at all. Like, what is the point of having a nation that you've defended and upheld and that you've built with your own hands for thousands of years if you just open the floodgates to every other culture and tell them that they can come to your land and do whatever they want? When you look at modern liberalism in this way, it's an incredibly satanic and evil mindset. It's an incredibly worldly mindset. You know, if we look at this from a biblical perspective, Christ did say, you know, what profit does a man have if he has the whole world but loses his soul? This is an incredibly relevant passage. This passage from the Bible, this quotation from Christ, is incredibly relevant to European man at this point of time. This is really something to think about. The boomer hippies were convinced that if we embrace the world with this totally indiscriminate embrace of, I love the world, I love everyone, I love everything, I want all the different cultures in the world, I want them for my own soul to be able to explore and to sample at will, and you know, this year I'll indulge in Asian culture and Asian food, and I will celebrate Asian culture, and you know, next year I'll be celebrating and exploring Middle Eastern culture. So this was the post-war deal with the devil that Western man made. We made after World War II, our people essentially, without realizing it, made a deal with the devil that we'd give up our own native soul, our own native European soul, in exchange for the world. This is no small thing, right? So now we live in our European lands, and they've been, for generations now, they've been ruled by this milquetoast soft liberal dictatorship. It's incredible, really, the change of the spirit of our age once we made the post-war World War II deal with the devil. It's instantly changed our focus, our mindset. It changed the focus of our Western soul from loving our own people and protecting and preserving our own people and cultures into just having this globo homo kalergi celebration of everything worldly. So this is incredibly unchristian. If you look at this point in time, modern liberalism has even rotted the soul of most European Christians. I mean, they've accepted this devil's deal as well. They've embraced the world. They're celebrating all cultures and all people, and this is an incredibly shameful state of affairs. for the Christian church and the Christian people to be in. And it's led to the Christian Europeans, the majority of them have supported all these open borders into the West. And now it's achieved what no generation ever in the past has been able to achieve, is we now see into European and Western lands the largest flood of foreign pagans. Tens of millions of foreign pagans have now flooded Europe and Western lands. They've been invited in. Think about this. Think about the irony of this situation and how inverted and shameful and back to front this is. Our European Christian ancestors spent the last 1,500 years defending Christian lands against the pagan and the heathen hordes. The blood shed to keep Europe Christian, to keep Europe European. Millions of our ancestors died. And they died because they loved their people. They loved their church, and they loved their homelands. They didn't die because they hated everybody else in the world. They died defending the honor of their people, their church, and their homelands. And now, the majority of Christians in the last few generations have said, well, throw the borders open. We love everyone. We love everything. And now we have tens of millions of pagan Chinese, and increasingly we're getting tens of millions of the pretty much the worst pagan culture on earth, Indians, flooding the West. It's this is incredible. This our ancestors will quite rightly see this as an absolutely shameful betrayal of the church and of our people. And modern liberal milquetoast Christians have supported this all the way. And the fact that I, as a Christian, am speaking out like this, a large percentage of modern Christians would see me as some kind of hate-filled bigot. Apparently, according to the modern idiot Christian, who's allowed his mind and his soul to be rotted by post-World War II liberalism, the rotten cult of liberalism has destroyed his faculty to think and his faculty to reason. These modern Christians think that if we don't throw our borders open to tens of millions of pagans and invite them in, that we're racist bigots. But then when you say, well, they're all pagans, they say, well, it's our duty as Christians to try and convert them. This is complete insanity. Well, okay, so throw the doors of your homelands open to pagan hordes until your people become a minority, and then the responsibility and the onus is on you as a Christian to convert these hordes to Christianity. This is complete suicidal, nonsensical insanity, right? And this is the homicidal and suicidal nature of modern liberalism. Right? We are now ruled over by these abstract ideals that have no root in tradition or honor or history or blood or nation. You know, we you are now looking at when my grandmother this was like 10 years ago, when she was in an old folks home. 70% of the staff in that old folks home were Indians. If you went back 200 years ago and told our Christian ancestors in Europe that we no longer have any family connections anymore, and when our elders have worked hard all their lives and then they get old, we put them in this building run by foreign pagans. Our Christian ancestors of 200 years ago would be absolutely stunned. They would be shocked. They'd be horrified. They'd say, how can you modern people have allowed such a shameful and disgusting situation as this, that you are now entrusting the care of your elders, your own family members, into the care of foreign pagans in some building that you visit only once a week. This is the incredible situation that we're in now. So we've managed to replace the native soul and the traditional native worldview and zeitgeist of European man with this incredibly sickening, destructive modern cult of liberalism. So I'll leave it there and I'll do a part 3. Thank you, Deus Volt.